you talked about a concept of being traditional isn't just doing what was historically done. Can you just describe to us the difference between tradition and imitation in kind of your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think sometimes the word tradition has been used as imitation. So like this is what our fathers did, right? And sometimes what that means is a little different, right? Than so I mean I'll give you an example, right? You know the before the gospel we say stasite metabobotheo, right? Akosumintag evangeli, right? And what does that mean? Well, it turns out, usually the guy saying it doesn't know what it means. And the people who are listening don't know what it means, right?
Hmm.
It turns out it's an instruction, okay? And that's why the deacon holds the cross. He's got that stern look on his face and he says, Stasi te, he kind of looks at the people. And he's telling them, stand up, we're about to read the gospel, right? So anyone who's not standing, you should stand as a sign of respect, right? Well, if you look at the origin of that phrase is actually Greek, right? And it used to be in Coptic, but it became Greek. And the reason it became Greek is that people understood Greek more than they understood Coptic. Like the lingua franca at one point was Greek. So many of the responses that the deacon says are actually, if you look in the Cholegi, it's Greek, right? Because the
Hmm.
people spoke Greek. So if you just take that small example, right? So the church changed it from Coptic to Greek because the people understood Greek.
Yeah.
So then you say, I need to do what they did, right? Well, what did they do? Well, they said stasite metavovotheo. So I'm going to say stasite metavovotheo, but that's not what they did. What they did was they spoke a command, an instruction in the language of the people. That's what they did, right? And so, that phrase, do what they did, can be, misunderstood, right? As do exactly what they did
Yeah.
versus do what the spirit is, right? And I think every time orthodoxy, the seed of orthodoxy in the Bible goes into a country, it comes out a little bit differently,
Hmm.
when the seed, when we planted the seed in Ethiopia, right? In the beginning, we tried to make it look very Coptic but now it's very Ethiopian, right? They sing in their language. The tunes are different. It's Ethiopian, right? And that's okay, and that's beautiful because they're not Egyptian, right?
Yeah.
And in Greece they're Greek, and in Russia they're Russian, and in Syria they're Syrian, and Antioch, they're Antiochian, right? I mean, and that's okay that we allow that the culture permeates the religion, right? And when we planted the seed in Egypt, we came out with things like Iboro Farahi, right? That the hymn of Oro is a pharaonic hymn. Pekathronos is a pharaonic hymn, right? I mean, a pharaonic hymn, I mean, a pharaoh, right? So
Yeah.
what is that? Well, that's kind of pagan idolatry, right? I mean, you're worshiping Pharaoh. You thought Pharaoh's a god, right? So you could easily say, wait a minute, you would use a pagan hymn for church? How could you do that? Right? But if you look at what our forefathers did, was they said, all right, is this your pagan hymn? All right, no problem. We'll take it and we'll use it for the church. Right? It's very open-minded.
Hmm.
We wouldn't do that now, right? If I showed up at a country, right, and the devil worshippers were singing a certain way, right, I wouldn't say, oh, let me take your tune and add Christian words to it. I'd be like, that's
Yeah.
devil, right? But that's what the Christians did in Egypt. And it's pharaonic, it's Egyptian, right? You planted the seed and it came out Egyptian, right? So, and that's okay that these countries manifest orthodoxy in different ways, right? According to their own culture.
Right. And I think you even brought up this point. We focus now on preservation, right? As opposed to uh, simply just trying to minister the gospel in the most, effective way that still has the essence of our tradition.
Yeah.
Um, this is hard, and I'm not going to ask you to give me a formula, but do you have any kind of like general guidelines for testing whether something is a tradition that probably is not really as open to change? as something that's more flexible? Like how do you think about that?
I mean, the only thing that's not flexible is
Hmm.
doctrine, right? What we believe. Um, and even then it's refined through time. Like no one talked about the divinity of Jesus for 300 years, until Arius came along and tested it, right? And said, yeah, he was creation, not creator. He was the
Hmm.
highest creation, but he was creation. And we're like, whoa, well, we've never really talked about this, but maybe we need to think about this, right?
Yeah.
So obviously the belief of the church, and it's fairly refined now, but over the last few hundred years, it's also been thought through and refined and crystallized, I think, in the life of the people. But it's difficult to say this one should go and this one should stay, right? The life of the church, it's alive, right? And it breathes and it feels and it evolves into something that's living and changing, right? I mean, when you
Hmm.
study the liturgy we have now and the services we have now, it wasn't like that 400, 500 years ago. It's evolved and changed,
Yeah.
and that's okay, right? And people have picked certain things and not picked other things, and focused on some things and not focused on some things, right? And that's just part of the evolution of the life of the church. A
Hmm.
hard and fast rule, that's difficult to come up with. The only thing I would encourage everyone to do, and the way if you want to pick a hard and fast rule, here's a hard and fast rule: focus on your own spiritual life and focus on education, right? If there's two things that we need to do as young people, be spiritual and be knowledgeable, right? And then you can, in your own way, in your own time, live out your faith, um, spiritually and knowledgeably, right? And that will, if we focused on that, then Abuna Shoy Kemal has this great saying where he says, people are like these concentric circles, right? And we all just kind of exist, and God is in the middle. And if we all just start to move towards God, then we'll all move towards each other, right, without thinking.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that has to be our focus, you
Yeah.
know. And you see this, right? When you look at the lives of saints in Greek church or Ethiopian church or whatever church, they all kind of they have the same scent. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of recognize the story, right? It's kind of the same story, right? Because it's kind of the same thing, right? It's the same Holy Spirit, it's the same God, right? So it's nice that you get that feeling,
Yeah.
even if they do speak a different language.